How did we end up here? This place is horrible. Smells like balls.
In 2013, my most anticipated movie of the year happened to become my favourite of the year, and that was the story of Solomon Northup, 12 Years a Slave. But this year, my most anticipated film happened to be Birdman. The trailer looked great and it had a really interesting cast. Michael Keaton is an actor whose versatility I don't think is utilised anywhere near as much as it should be. And then I saw that the director was Alejandro González Iñárritu. This is his 5th feature film, and being familiar with all of his previous films and loving some of them, I couldn't help but look forward to this. So, with all that in mind, did Birdman live up to the prestige it had set? Well, now that I finally got to see it, I can say that this is definitely the black sheep of the director's filmography. But my word, is it good. I'm sure that there are people still out there who, after having seen the trailer, still aren't satisfied with what the film is actually about, and I don't blame them. So allow me to give a very brief summary. Birdman is Michael Keaton. His character, Regan Thompson, was famous for playing the iconic superhero Birdman, but once he left the role, his fame faded to the point that now his entire existence is merely in its shadow. As a result of this, he tried to rejuvenate his career on Broadway, which is just as unfortunate as you'd expect, causing nothing but absolute calamities. The great thing about the movie is that it always feels alive. Ultimately, it follows the existential struggles of Regan, yet the film manages to have a certain urgency about it. Regan wants to find a purpose for his life, but it seems almost inevitable that he's past his peak and he'll never get it back. Regan Thompson is a fantastic character, and though he may be pitiful, he remains relatable. It sounds like a very personal story, and at its core that's what Birdman is. Regan is the most crucial element and this is his tale, yet the rest of the cast play an equally important role in establishing the tone, and it's the character chemistry that adds another layer to Birdman that enriches the plot. All the actors were great, and I don't mean that lightly. I mean every single person that was on screen was a joy to watch. Not only that, but the cast was clearly carefully chosen. There's a very meta undertone all the way through this film, which I'll get into more detail to later, but the cast were chosen because of their history with the superhero genre. There's the obvious similarity with Michael Keaton having once played Batman, but you also have Edward Norton, who left his role as Hulk, and most recently Emma Stone, who featured in the new Spider-Man films. There were moments with Keaton where it felt as though the real actor was emerging, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of these emotions of frustration he must have experienced in real life before. Keaton's portrayal of Regan reminded me a lot of Rupert Pupkin. He delivers a very comedic performance with pathos. He's so ambitious, but he's a wash-up and we all know it. Emma Stone, on the other hand, really sells the relationship between her and her father, which again adds another dimension to Regan himself. She's a very lost soul and she delivers a terrific monologue at one point. Then there's Ed Norton as the self-important, unpredictable method actor Mike. He's grasping onto his fading celebrity flame by any means necessary, and he's fucking hilarious at doing so. All of these elements alone would have made for a great film, but there is still so much that Birdman not only got right, but demonstrated them as superlative pieces of skill. It's no secret, but for those that don't know, this movie is filmed so that it appears to be in one continuous shot, much like how a theatre production is, unedited. There are invisible cuts and obvious moments of camera trickery, yet the camera movement is seamless, and even if you think you know where all the edits are, it's so inconspicuous that you'd never get them all. This is some stellar directing, which only a genius or a madman would attempt, and I get the impression that we're dealing with the former. Yet what was even more impressive than the level of artistry shown in Birdman was just how cohesive it was with the amount of people that worked on it. Obviously you had Iñárritu as the director, but he wasn't the only one writing the screenplay. There were 3 other people, with 4 people in total working on one screenplay. It's amazing to see that the final product was so functional. Because I also haven't mentioned that beneath this movie lies a very abstract subplot, which I won't spoil for anyone, but it's more of a surprise than anything to see that the focus of this film wasn't jumbled, with so much occurring in one story. Birdman's structure is near perfect for something that has the restriction of no editing and therefore can't cross-cut between the varied plots. I mean, I got everything I wanted from the characters. Their arcs felt complete. See, the film comes across as really natural and organic. The scenes transition from one to the next very fluidly, and the acting has this sort of improvisational feel to it. Again, all this mirrors theatre, yet when you understand how the film was actually made, you realise that this would be in complete contention with the production. Pretty much every shot is a long take, and the planning necessary to get the timing, the framing, everything perfectly in sync with one another would have been absurd. It's something that you have to admire that they'd even attempt it, but it's something that you have to applaud because they actually pulled it off. I really can't say enough about this film. Every element of it I loved. Even the soundtrack was a standout feature, and it was nothing but a drum track. In all of Iñárritu's previous films, his main music collaborator has been Gustavo Santaolalla, who, if you aren't aware of his work, I suggest that you check him out because he's very good. But this time he decided not to use him. Yeah, even disbanding an already successful collaboration made for something which works arguably even better. See, Santaolalla has a very distinct style with his soundtracks. They're very solemn and very slow. But with something like Birdman, the soundtrack was upbeat because the film is always moving. Literally. There were moments of flair with the score, with the way that it broke the fourth wall. There was a part in the film which had a unique way of incorporating the music in the scene, and it left me with a giant grin on my face. Honestly, it was absolutely genius. It felt as though the filmmakers behind this were constantly nudging and winking at the audience, because ultimately, that is the entire point of Birdman. I mentioned earlier about the meta nature of this film, and I don't think it's an understatement to say that this is one of the most self-aware films I've seen in a very long time. For me, the first word that springs to mind when I think of this picture is satire. Birdman is a satire, and it accomplishes this so well, just in terms of how much ground it covers. Anyone involved in the movie industry in some way after watching this will probably want to take a step back just to look at themselves and analyse, really, why do we do what we do? Some of the movie's reflections of real life are quite blatant, but that still doesn't take the enjoyment from them. It breaks down how generic superhero movies have gotten, but also looks at the movie industry as a whole. It goes from the relationship between the creators and their audience, to critics, different types of actors, even just looking at the idea of what a celebrity is. Sure, all the characters are flawed as we see all their pros and cons, but it doesn't detract from the validity of what it is that they're saying. Art is art, even if it's just grown-ups playing pretend. There was so much that this film got right that I really don't want to focus on its negatives because there were so few. I mean, there were a couple of moments where the character chemistry felt scripted, but that's as much as I really want to say. After watching it, I really thought to myself, what didn't I like about that film? And it took me a while. The level of detail and craftsmanship is astonishing. This is the meticulously planned works of a master. You can tell just how much care has been put into this picture because everything that the characters do and say has a purpose. When the characters rehearse their lines with one another, it reveals more about them as characters, which in turn reveals more about us as an audience member. The non-fiction, the fiction, and the fiction within the fiction all blur into one. I really can't commend it any more than I have. When you have so much attention to detail that the adverts in the newspaper have context, then you clearly care about what it is that you're doing. The sad thing is, unfortunately, that this isn't going to be everyone's cup of tea. If you haven't already guessed from the trailer, there are moments in the film that I'd call borderline experimental. At one point it becomes a Dadaist wet dream, it just embraces the chaos. And I know that there will be people who just won't be willing to accept it. All I will say is this. Not understanding the movie shouldn't be the same as not liking the movie. Overall, this is a wonderfully entertaining film. It moves at an exhilarating pace and I can't wait to see it again. It's a movie that could be watched over and over because it's so dense and there's so much for us to look at and decipher. If this doesn't end up being my favourite film of the year, then it must be one hell of a year. Birdman is a 9.5 out of 10.
Let's go back one more time and show them what we're capable of.
Birdman!
There you go, you motherfucker.